Thank you very much. Good evening. I'd like to thank for the invitation. I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm even happier to learn that South Korea is interested in starting a future ICT-like initiative and is interested in pushing for social simulation. So, what can science do for better policy making, better decision making? Well, the problems of the world are complex. This ranges from climate change, over conflict and war, to the financial crisis. And the understanding of our complex world lags really behind. I've been raised at a time when most people believed that traffic jams are unavoidable, that crowd disasters are God-given or caused by panic or aggressive behavior, and that stock markets crash due to black swans. Well, all of this is wrong. Let me give an example that's really paradigmatic for what we have to talk about. Here, cars are driving in a circle. It's not a difficult task. But we'll see that after some time, actually, this free traffic flow breaks down right now. Actually, a so-called phantom traffic jam is formed. Now, why is this happening? Now, even if we knew everything about every single driver, about the way every driver thinks and feels, we couldn't predict this. And we couldn't fix traffic jams by knowing everything about everyone. There's a theory, however, that allows us to understand why this is happening. And namely, when the density of vehicles goes above a certain threshold, then traffic flow becomes unstable. Small variations in the speeds are amplified. The next vehicle will respond, but will respond with some delay. And in order to compensate for that delay, that driver will brake a little bit harder than the previous driver, and the next one even harder. So what we see is an amplification effect and a domino effect that finally leads to a situation that nobody wants. Cars are stopped, even though drivers want to go fast. Drivers have all the information they need. They have good education, have a driver's license, have good technology, they have the best intentions to avoid this, and still this is happening. Now, there are solutions for this, but this is also important for all the other examples, because the big unsolved problems of the world result from systemic instabilities. And this applies to unstable supply chains, such as bullwhip effects. You can make your own experience with the so-called beer game. But on the larger scale, actually, we're faced with economic instability, booms and recessions, and these are basically stop-and-go-ways in our world economy. We see that we might face crowd disasters when the density gets too high. That means the situation gets out of control, even if nobody wants to harm anybody. We may see unstable social dynamics when it comes to the spreading of crime. We might see tragedies of the commons, even though nobody wants to kill all the fish in the world, of course, although everyone would benefit from a cooperative solution. This cooperative solution is often unstable, like this free traffic flow before, and that's why it's actually sometimes breaking down. Same thing for conflicts. That could be a result of social instabilities or revolutions. And what makes these kinds of problems uncontrollable? This is due to cascade effects. So sometimes a single local perturbation can be enough in an unstable system to mess up the entire system. And if you think this is just a funny experiment, unfortunately, you're wrong about it. Of course, we see this kind of dynamics actually when we have blackouts of power grids in the financial system. So What you see here is bankruptcy cascades as they happened after the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. In fact, hundreds of banks went bust, and actually that caused losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So in order to face these kinds of problems, we need to integrate previously separated knowledge. We need to bring different disciplines together: natural sciences, engineering sciences, and social sciences. And we came up with this Future ICT project that had a number of core activities. Number one, building a planetary nervous system. Number two, building a living Earth simulator. Then working on a global participatory platform, social-inspired information communication technologies, global system science, an innovation accelerator, then various exploratories for financial systems, health and epidemics, crime, conflict, and so on. And then across everything, ethics, which is very important for this to be successful. We created a global Future ICT community. More than 25 European countries were involved. We had a community established in the United States, now also in Mexico, South America, then China, Singapore, Australia, and now even South Korea. So very happy to have you on board. And there were many academic institutions involved, more than 100, many research organizations, many businesses were interested in this, and we had also prominent supporters, such as George Soros. So, let's go into details about evidence-based decision-making. Let's start with big data analytics. Actually, with all the data that are now becoming available, we can craft new instruments to explore the world. We can build new compasses for decision makers that would not just measure productivity per capita, but also things that we cannot see or feel, but that matter, such as social capital, solidarity, cooperativeness, compliance, reputation, trust, attention, curiosity, but also happiness. We can measure the spreading of international tension. We can actually say something about epidemic spreading. We can study global knowledge spreading and also the spreading of ideas and cultural spreading too. Now, within just 60 seconds, actually, we're sending 700,000 Google queries, we're posting 500,000 Facebook posts, we're producing GPS location data, shopping data, a lot more. So this is, of course, a huge amount of data, and people now say data is the new oil. But besides creating new economic volume, what can we do? What does it mean for science? Is Chris Anderson right that we will see the end of theory, that the data deluge makes the scientific method obsolete? Can we know everything in the future? Can we maybe even build a crystal ball that would allow us to see what's going on in the world, in any place, right now, or even predict what might happen in the future? Could we use all this information to act like a wise king, to take the optimal decisions for your country or the entire world? Would that be possible in principle? Sounds plausible. We'll see that there are some tricky issues. Now, certainly, if we wanted to do this, we would also have to make sure that the world behaves as we expect. And for this, we would need to be able to manipulate people's decisions. But given knowledge is power, would that be possible? Well, perhaps, because now we're kind of confronted with personalized information and recommendations. And that could actually influence our behavior. So the question is, will we be remotely controlled? I mean, this is a discussion which is not only relevant for advertisement, but also for politics, where people are now talking about nudging, soft paternalism, and using manipulation as a tool, in order to make people do what they want. But should we really do this? Who of you would be fine with such a wise king? Please raise your hands. No. And in fact, we need to be careful about such manipulation, because we would all end up living in filter bubbles. And that can cause communication failure. Actually, it could be one of the reasons why in the United States Republicans and Democrats have so much difficulties understanding each other. If they talk about the same subject, say health insurance, they're actually using different words and concepts. This makes it very difficult for them to understand each other. Of course, each party, each member of each party is living in a filter bubble, which is just made to fit. Well, such manipulation, in other words, could also undermine the wisdom of crowds, which is actually the basis of democracies and also financial markets. So mistakes would potentially be made if we're manipulated with biased information. But besides, big data is not the universal tool to understand the government world. Now, certainly it can be useful in many contexts. It can help us to take better decisions when it comes to environment, saving energy, optimization, and many other things. So big data can certainly be very helpful. But we need to be aware that we might also see patterns that are perhaps not meaningful at all. If we look into the sky, we seem to see these patterns, and at least according to scientific wisdom, they don't have a meaning. Well, if you think they have, here's another example. This shows actually the serial killers as a function of chocolate consumption. If this was a true causal relationship, I would be living really dangerous in Switzerland. But of course, this is just a spurious correlation. Now, here's another problem. Usually what we want to do is distinguish between good and bad risk. Now, we want to find the criminal, we want to find the terrorist, we want to find the bad risk when we are an insurance company and so on. But usually, good and bad risks are not well separated from each other. You would have two overlaying point clouds, and it turns out that it's difficult to separate good and bad. And so mistakes would be made. Mistakes of first kind and mistakes of second kind. False alarms in cases where we wouldn't notice that somebody has bad intentions or is a big risk. We need to be aware of this. And it could also imply actually discrimination to a much larger extent than we have it today in our society, because we could discriminate more with big data. Do we really want this? And if not, how do we deal with it? Now, maybe there is a smarter way of evidence-based decision making, namely intelligent systems. And in fact, now there are robots that become more and more capable and sophisticated and smart. These robots can learn, they can soon multiply and evolve without our help. In other words, they can build other robots, and these robots might be smarter than those robots that build them. So there could be a technological evolution without our help, largely without our help. And in fact, intelligent machines are now better chess players than the best chess players in the world. They're better workers in many areas. They're often better in answering questions. They will be better drivers and maybe even better doctors, to give just a few examples. So, would perhaps even an artificial superintelligence be possible? Well, people like Ray Kurzweil actually think so. They think about 10 years' time, computers will reach brain power. Some people think it's 5 years, some people think it's 25 years, but anyway, most likely this is happening. Computers or robots can do many tasks better than humans already, single tasks. Well, certainly there is competition, And so the question is, could such super intelligences really be grown? And there was just recently a news about Baidu actually engaging into deep learning and trying to do such a thing. And in perspective, you could even think that this computer knows the political party you would vote or your opinion on a certain subject. So I'd like to ask a question. Who of you would accept a digital mirror self voting for you? Please raise your hands. No? Well, there are other kinds of concerns, like really the big tech guys in the Silicon Valley are getting more and more concerned about this. So Elon Musk of Tesla Motors, for example, said, I think we should be very careful about artificial intelligence. If I had to guess at what our biggest existential threat is, it's probably that. We need to be very careful. And Stephen Hawking voiced on artificial intelligence, humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. And Bill Gates voiced, I'm in the camp that is concerned about superintelligence. And also Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, said, computers are going to take over from humans, no question. But will we be gods? Will we be like family pets? Or will it be ants that get stepped on? I don't know. So this is certainly a discussion that we need to lead. We need to think about this issue, but there's something that I'm actually more concerned about, because powerful tools enable potentially serious misuse, and we should be prepared because any misuse that is possible would probably happen sooner or later. And we need to be concerned because cybercrime is exploding. So now within 1 year, we're basically losing $3 trillion on cybercrime, and it's still exponentially increasing. So this is dangerous. In effect, people say there are companies that have been hacked, and those who don't know yet. And even the military, the Pentagon, and as we read today, the White House, have been hacked. The computers of these institutions have been hacked. So nobody seems to be safe. And certainly, if you have a super powerful tool, then this would attract organized criminals, it would attract extremists, it would attract terrorists. So we need to worry about security. And therefore, it's a design issue that I'd like to raise. What I'm trying to say is, if we go for such kind of powerful tools, then we need safety mechanisms, we need distributed designs. And even if it's a super intelligent machine, 100 times more intelligent than any of us, even this machine would sometimes make mistakes, no matter how smart. So that also means there could be really disastrous outcomes, even if that happens only every 50 or 100 or 500 years, it could be really disastrous. So therefore, I believe such kind of solution should be applied on sufficiently small scales. Here's an example. The United States and Europe did similarly in terms of unemployment after the financial crisis started. But now, the United States is recovering a lot, while the Euro area seems to be still in pretty bad shape. So that means if you apply one recipe to a large area, that could have really huge impacts. And I also think we need to keep in mind potential dangers for democracy, like loss of wisdom of crowds, reduced trust, discrimination, loss of autonomy or freedom, self-censorship, loss of diversity, reduced innovation, failed adaptation, security issues. So anyway, we're in a global competition. So if other countries do it, should we do it too? And do we need to sacrifice our privacy for this? Because some of these methods would require a hell lot of data, in fact. Is it needed to have so much data? So, that's an important question. Even if we would know how everyone thinks and feels, this would not allow us to predict the future, as we have seen that for the simple example of traffic jams in the beginning. So, it's true, there are companies out there like Recorded Future that are trying to predict people's behavior, and they're doing pretty well. Some behaviors can be predicted with an accuracy of, say, 95%. This is really impressive. But not even identical twins are fully identical. So if you would want to simulate an individual, we would never get closer to this, I guess. And even if we had 100% knowledge of every single individual, interaction can change everything. So just think of this example. Caesar actually meeting of her data, and this is going to change her life, and because these are powerful people, this love affair is also changing history, in fact. We know it all. One meeting can change everything. And in fact, here is an experiment that we've made. People interact in a circle, there are 2 types of people, and here is a model, a micro model that is actually predicting 96% of all laboratory decisions of these real people. 96%. It's an incredible accuracy of a micro model. So you would think this should be able to predict what's happening in the system, but this is actually what we see, and it looks very different. So this is shocking, even though we have 90% accuracy. Now the reason for this is actually that this is an unstable system, and 2 deviations as compared to this initial setting actually is creating a completely different outcome. Compare this with this, completely different. Now another surprise is if we now add some noise to this 90% correct deterministic decision model, we get better results. Now we'd always think we add noise, the model should lose accuracy. We get better results because now these perturbations that change the overall state of the system are taken into account. Even if we cannot predict the individual decisions, this variability is important for the outcome. But then if we look into data again, it turns out people are not just behaving in a deterministic way plus some randomness. They're pretty strategic actually, and their strategies are also individually different. So we will never really fully get it in this simulation. But actually, what we care about is the macro outcome. What happens on the large scale, on the society scale, or the city scale. And this is what really matters, and this is what we actually can understand. And we can understand it without having to know every single people's brain and what's happening in it. And what is important to realize is that there are basically 2 kinds of situations, stable ones and unstable ones. But in both cases, prediction is of limited use. So there's these kind of good weather situations, everything is running smoothly, like free traffic flow or whatever, and actually you don't need to care because even if people do make mistakes, it wouldn't really matter for the outcome of the system. However, when sometimes there is bad weather, and this is what we really have to care about because unpredictable things are happening here, and we'd like to get more control of these kind of situations. Now, unfortunately, these situations are sensitive to small variations in the system, and that makes it not only difficult to predict, but also difficult to control. And we know that very well, actually, from weather forecasts, right? only we can forecast weather with a certain probability and over a few days. And that wouldn't change if we had 100 times more data or 100,000 times more data, because the reason for this is the phenomenon of turbulence, which is well known in physics, which just makes this unpredictable. It's the so-called butterfly effect that comes in here. So, how then should we use computer simulations? Well, we should focus on understanding complex dynamical systems and on resilient system design and operation. This is what I believe. Because here really it can help us a lot. It can help us enormously, in fact. So how do we build resilient designs? Well, some of the measures you can take is decentralization, modular designs, distributed control. All of that makes complex dynamical systems more controllable. So we're getting into evidence decision-making 3.0, explanatory models. And here there is another surprise, a model with a few parameters and little data can be more powerful than a big data set about the system. And the reason is the problem of overfitting. Your model may just fit noise, meaningless variability in the data. And here's an example. Google's Lutrans has been celebrated as one of the biggest successes of big data analytics. So what do? Basically look at how often do people type in, I have a headache, or I have a fever, I don't feel well, or whatever, and then you build an index and compare that with actually numbers of people who are ill, like from the World Health Organization, and then you use this to predict the disease, the spreading of the disease. Now, actually it turned out it works less well than people thought for a long time, and partly because of advertisements, which makes people go on certain kind of web pages, and on the other hand, it's also because they're changing their algorithms all the time. There is another approach, though, that uses little data and a model, which is very successful. And that's why it was also published in Science, I guess. This is work with Dirk Brockman. We've used little data from the World Health Organization that comes with 2 weeks delay, basically. And then if you look into this data and how diseases spread in the world, you would see a pretty chaotic spatial temporal pattern. It's really frustrating, and you would think, okay, you can never predict this. However, the reason for this chaos is actually that people are doing a lot of air travel. Now, we have found a way of taking into account air travel data and define a new kind of effective distance, where two airports that might have a large geographical distance but have a large passenger volume are close to each other effectively, while two cities that have very few people traveling among them might be geographically close, but effectively they have a large distance. And if you take this into account, you get a completely different pattern. Suddenly, you get circular spreading patterns, and you can understand this. But you can also use this actually to detect the likely origin of the disease, which is actually not so simple in the beginning. There it's often not known. So how do you do this? You look at the disease data from the World Health Organization from the point of view of all the airports in the world. And one of the patterns turns out to be most circular, and that identifies you, the city where the disease is probably broke out. Now, together with this circular spreading pattern, however, you can even predict into the future. That means you can say, what are the cities that are likely to be next to be hit by the flu, which are second next. So if you have limited resources, like immunization shots or doctors or whatever, you can put them in these cities in order to help contain the disease. So now we can do some prediction, we can do preparation, by combining some data with models, the right kind of data with the right kind of models. And in fact, we've developed a lot of quantitative simulation models in the past for pedestrian flows, crowd disasters, for traffic congestion, for booms and recessions, for cascade failures in power grids, for the resilience of gas supply, for organ information, for coordination between people and formation of behavioral conventions, for the breakdown or emergence of cooperation, for the spreading of crime, but also for the evolution of moral behavior, for the evolution of social preferences, the emergence of social norms, the occurrence of conflict, and the spreading of conflict. So we understand all this much, much better than just a few years ago. That is the value of social simulation. And so the idea of Future ICT was to bring all these models together and to apply them on a global scale in order to better understand what is going on and what might be the implications of doing this or that. I would be working similar to a weather forecast system. It would not be perfect, it would be making probabilistic answers, but it might actually help us to avoid certain mistakes and to take better decisions. It might create awareness for the risks and the opportunities, and from that point of view, it would have a lot of value for us. Unfortunately, there is probably no universal automated approach to find the right models for complex dynamical systems. So you cannot just run a huge computer program. You need a lot of people, scientists, complexity scientists, to do this actually. So far, I have not seen that the big data approach would actually reveal automatically the laws of nature, like the gravitational law or the elementary particles forces. I mean, that is really a task that big data should show. If we believe that big data could replace theory, then it needs to find these laws of nature. As long as I haven't been demonstrated that this happened, I don't think big data can do it alone. So it still requires smart people, fortunately. And this is also because actually pattern recognition is more difficult than you might think. So this should recognize an infinity sign, but you see how difficult that actually is, in particular if there's some noise in the system. Now, we are actually facing some significant challenges in the world. The world is changing at a rapid pace, and to keep up with that pace, we need a large-scale, open, participatory approach. We have really to work together, and that's the reason why we had this global participatory platform as part of Future ICT. Some countries haven't paid enough attention to this, but this is really important. Understanding the world needs probably less data than one would think, but more collaboration and actually multiple perspectives, because there is no way to find the function that we should optimize. And even if we could optimize the world in real time, which we cannot, and will not be able to do in the future, but even if we could, the most fundamental question is unsolved, which is which goal function to choose. If we happen to choose the wrong goal function, it could be disastrous to the world. And that's why it's good to have many eggs in the basket, to bet not just on one horse, to go for a portfolio approach. That means have a mixture of different goal functions, and different countries, regions, or companies pursue different goal functions. This diversity, these multiple perspectives are of high importance. But that's engaged in an international collaboration, because we need all the smart people to work together in order to catch up with the pace at which the world is changing. I actually don't have such a bad opinion of artificial intelligence, but I think what we should be doing is create collective intelligence. And I think this is actually superior to superintelligence, because we're faced with the combinatorial complexity of the world. And in order to cope with this, we need to have combinatorial intelligence. So, in the same way as an array of many small antennas is more powerful than one huge antenna, do we need to use the value of knowledge that is distributed over many minds? So we need to learn how to bring the best ideas of many people together. And there we can learn an interesting lesson from the so-called Netflix prize. They spent $1 million to improve their prediction algorithm for the movies that people like by just 10%. And turned out to be a terribly difficult task. And nobody managed actually to win within 2 years' time. There was one team that was more or less always the best, but they couldn't do it by themselves. So one day they decided they would team up with other teams. And they had obviously worse predictions. And what they then did is they just averaged over the predictions of those teams. And you would think, okay, if you average over these predictions, it would be worse than the best prediction. The opposite was the case. It was better, and it was good enough to win the prize. So what we learned from this is, it's not the best who wins, but diversity wins. And so we need to build collaboration platforms that can actually harvest all the ideas that people have. So if we engage into public dialogue with the citizens, then there are different points of view, and I think it can be very useful to find out what are the different points of views, and also the points of views of all these stakeholders. So we could use kind of debate platforms, argument maps. There could be open maps where people start to collect these arguments and basically boil it down to what are the main points to be considered, and then politicians would integrate these different points of views and maybe sit together with these groups. So certainly with a participatory approach we can reach more speed, more capacity, more wisdom. And we know that from crowdsourcing. Take Wikipedia. Everyone is using Wikipedia. Nobody thought that would possibly would work. Why would people spend their time getting nothing for writing articles? But they do. Same thing with GitHub, social coding, or citizen science, now becoming a big thing. We could even map the entire globe in 3D in a crowdsourced way, using all the photographs that people upload all the time. So these are the positions of the photographers, and these are the positions of where the cameras were pointing, and it turns out that from all these publicly uploaded photographs you can reconstruct this building in 3D from your computer at home. And you could do that with any place in the world. You don't even have to travel anymore. Yeah, and we could do that really with many things. We should therefore really create a participatory system. And the advantage of this is that we would grow a really powerful information innovation ecosystem together. That means, if we can combine those things that everyone can create, if there is interoperability, then we could create new things from it. And in this way, the more things are being created, the more things become possible, and that allows exponential innovation, not linear. In the past, a car company produced, say, a new car every 2 years, and then again a new car 2 years later, and so on. This is linear innovation. Well, what happens here is exponential innovation. And that is what we really need. And that's why also the G8 was writing about open data. To be competitive, we need to activate the full bandwidth of society, and that can only happen with openness. So, and concluding with some of the new principles of the economy 4.0 in digital society, of course there will be more automation. Information and knowledge production will be key, will be at the heart. But of course, computers and robots are going to do more of the work we've done in the past. We'll be focusing on creative work. We'll be engaged in co-creation, and we'll come up with much more personalized products that are really fit to every single person. Well, with all the data that are now becoming available about us, yes, we can much better fit products to people. So there will be a new focus on the user, the customer, and the citizen. And that is actually fitting perfectly to what we have in mind with Government 3.0. This is exactly the same thing. Put the citizen into the center. Collaborate. So, if we create new opportunities for everyone, that is actually good for our entire economy, for our entire society. If we set these information systems well, enabling users, customers, citizens will lead to better services, better products, better businesses, better neighborhoods, smarter cities, and smarter societies. But for this, we need to learn how to open up data and benefit as many people as possible. This will maximize economic and societal capacity, so it's of strategic importance. And in fact, we could together build the biggest catalyst of the world, the planetary nervous system. And actually, I'd like to invite South Korea to build development hubs and to build with us this open and participatory system. So what we do is we would use the Internet of Things and build a software layer on top of it that makes it intelligent and useful for everyone. And with these real-time data that we can now generate about every single thing in the world, we can now create real-time feedbacks. And with these real-time feedbacks, we can actually overcome many of the instability problems that we had in the past, such as this terrible stop-and-go traffic. So you can see in this computer simulation that we can reproduce the actually observed phenomena pretty well. So our models work. And now what we want to do is we want to understand what caused this stop-and-go traffic. For this, we're beaming ourselves out of this car, and it turns out there is an on-ramp. A few cars are trying to get on the freeway that produces small disruptions. These disruptions are amplified and then create, through a cascade effect, these stop-and-go waves. Now assume the cars would be equipped with radar sensors that measure the distances and relative velocities, and we would use this information for controls of the car. So self-driving cars now, and you can see that we can actually stabilize the traffic flow. We can increase the capacity. We can get rid of the stop-and-go traffic over here by changing the interactions between the cars. And that becomes possible by real-time feedback. We've done a similar thing actually for traffic control in city centers. And what we've done is we've again used real-time information, again local measurement, local feedbacks. And rather than having the traffic lights control the traffic flow, we actually turned towards a situation where the traffic flows control the traffic lights. And it turns to create dramatic improvements for public transport, for pedestrian cyclists, also some benefits for motorized traffic, and huge benefits for the environment too. So there is a new paradigm enabled by the Internet of Things, which is self-organizing systems. Now the question is, could we also build assistance systems for social systems, for example, for cooperation. Can we turn this strategy of the commons into this well-working system? Well, I actually think so. But for this, we need to engage in interoperability in a multicultural world. Just think of real-time translation. I speak in my smartphone, and you hear what I'm saying in South Korea. So that has been possible in the past, but now we have these devices, these digital assistants that can help us to interact across cultural barriers. And we should build more of these devices. Because then we can really combine the success principles of all the countries in the world. And each culture is actually a collection of success principles. So we should really use this to all our benefit, to everyone's benefit in the world. So let's do this together. Thank you very much.
스마트 디지털 소사이티라는 주제로 좋은 강연을 해주신 닥터 프로페서 헬빙 교수님께 감사드립니다. 뭐 여러 가지 인사이트도 주셨지만 요약을 하면 스마트 디지털 소사이티를 위해서는 경영과학과 산업공학과 인간공학과 산업경영 시스템과 시뮬레이션이 다 중요하다. 이런 요약을 해주셨습니다. Would you please come to the front? 오늘 좋은 말씀 해주신 프로페서 헬빙에게도 저희가 감사패를 전달하려고 합니다. Certificate of Appreciation, Professor Dirk Helbing, ETH Zürich, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. In recognition of your excellent keynote speech titled Building a Smart Digital Society Together in the 2015 Annual Joint Conference of the KORMS Society, Jeju, South Korea, April 9, 2015, Seok-Kwon Jang, the President of the Korean Operation Research and Management Science Society. Let's give him a big hand again.